Welcome back to Investing Talk Podcast. Today, we're going to take a look at Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing, TSM. Things are getting interesting with their stock. As we head into March 2025, we've got like a kind of perfect storm of things happening, a mix of factors. We've got TSM's, their kind of dominant position in the semiconductor market, the U.S. pushing to make more chips here, and then that huge demand for AI chips. And we'll uncover some pretty interesting stuff today. Like TSM just announced they're investing $100 billion. That's a lot of money. And then their profits are like breaking records. Plus, we'll touch on those rumors that won't go away about them maybe taking a stake in Intel. So to walk us through all this, we have our expert back with us.
Always a pleasure to be here.
So let's just start with where TSM stock sits right now, as we recorded this March 7th.
At today's close, it finished at $178.65.
$178.66. Okay, so help us understand that number. What's like the context for that?
Well, in the past month, TSM has actually seen a pretty decent dip, about 14.4%. But if we zoom out and look over the past year, TSM is actually up about 22%.
So it sounds like what we're seeing is, short-term volatility clashing with this long-term potential for growth. What do you think's behind this kind of back and forth we're seeing?
Well, a few things are playing into it, but a big one, everyone's talking about is this huge investment TSM's making in U.S. chip manufacturing. Like you said, we're talking $100 billion.
Okay, yeah, that's got to be a big deal.
Yeah.
Can you unpack that for us a little? What's that investment all about?
Yeah, so they're planning to build 5 new facilities in Arizona, and we're talking, fabrication plants, packaging facilities, even a whole R&D center.
Which seems to line up with, what we've seen for the last, since Trump, actually, the push to get more chips made here to reduce how much we rely on foreign supply chains, especially given how things are between the U.S. and China.
Right. I mean, that's absolutely a big factor. And of course, it makes sense politically. It's a very popular idea, creating more jobs here.
And that $100 billion, that's actually on top of what, $65 billion they committed before under the CGPS Act, right?
That's right.
So that brings it up to $165 billion total. That is a massive bet on America. Are there any concerns, though? I mean, is anyone worried about this move?
Yeah, there are definitely some people raising concerns. Like some experts are saying that moving all this production to the U.S., it could actually weaken Taiwan's position in the industry, which, they call their silicon shield for a reason.
So it could actually backfire on them in a way.
It's a possibility some people are worried about. Plus, there's always the basic question of, it's so much money. Is it actually going to deliver a return in the long run? It's a risk for sure, even if it's a calculated one.
And then, of course, we can't forget about, the whole geopolitical thing. Relations between the U.S. and China. I mean, that's still a huge factor. Any kind of escalation there could have a big impact on TSM.
Exactly. That all adds to the volatility we see with TSM stock. Like, remember the tariff announcements on March 3rd? That initially triggered a negative reaction, though we did see a slight rebound as investors kind of had time to think it over. But okay, now let's change gears a little and talk about another factor that's really impacting TSM AI.
TSM, they make the chips that power, so many of these AI systems we're using every day, they're kind of like quietly in the background of it all. So what about their role in the whole AI world?
They have an incredible list of clients. Apple, Nvidia, AMD, even OpenAI, they all rely on TSM. And that dominance they have in the AI chip market, that's driving so much of the long-term growth potential.
And we saw that reflected in their recent earnings report, right?
Exactly. They announced record profits for the fourth quarter of 2024, and the forecasts for this year are strong too. And a lot of that's being driven by the AI demand, though, there was that recent report about how TSM's, their U.S.-traded ADRs dropped 13% after a Chinese AI firm announced a cost-competitive model.
So is that like a threat to them? Do we have to worry about that?
It's something to keep an eye on for sure, but their customer base is so diverse, it might not even really have much impact. Okay, now there's one more piece we need to talk about. Those rumors that just won't die about a potential stake in Intel.
Yeah, those have been floating around for a while. Fill us in. What's going on with that?
The word is that TSM was thinking about investing in Intel's U.S. factories, but then Taiwan's economy ministry came out and denied it. It's all pretty hush-hush right now. But the fact that these rumors won't go away, it adds another layer of, mystery to this whole TSM story.
It really shows you just how complex things are,
Yeah.
all the stuff that's happening behind the scenes in this industry.
Yeah.
So we've got the U.S. investment, the AI boom, the Intel rumors. I mean, it all kind of adds up to this volatility we're seeing with TSM stock.
It's a lot of different pieces at play, for sure.
So now let's think about what this means for investors, people who are thinking about TSM. What should they be thinking about right now?
I think the key is to remember that there's, both long-term potential and short-term risks. So let's start with the positives. The bull case for TSM. What makes it attractive? Well, the first thing is, just how dominant they are. They control, like, 60% of the foundry market. That's massive.
Yeah, they're the leaders, no question.
Right, and that's not something that's just going to disappear overnight. Plus, like we were talking about, they're perfectly positioned to really capitalize on the AI boom. That's a huge growth opportunity.
And could their U.S. expansion actually help with that, even with all the risks we talked about?
It could, if they manage it well. It would help them with, those tariff risks. They could get access to incentives from the government and maybe even get more customers out of it.
So there are some reasons to be optimistic about TSM.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But we can't pretend the risks aren't there.
So let's talk about those risks then. What are the downsides investors need to be aware of?
Well, I think the most obvious one is just the volatility we're seeing right now. The stock has taken a hit, and there's no guarantee it's going to bounce back quickly. The market's kind of in a shaky place.
And the tariff situation, that's still a big unknown. What could that mean for TSM?
Yeah, we've got those trade tensions. And if they escalate, it could definitely hurt TSM. The whole global trade situation is it's complex, and any changes could throw things off. And then, that U.S. expansion, it's a huge project.
Definitely comes with risks.
For sure. I mean, they could go over budget, run into delays, hit regulatory hurdles. Who knows what else could come up? And all of that could impact how successful the project is and how TSM performs financially. And then, we can't forget about geopolitics either.
Right. The U.S. and China, that's a constant source of tension, and Taiwan is right in the middle of it.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's also, the chance that the whole industry could be disrupted. Like, remember that Chinese AI chip model we talked about? It's a cost-competitive model, and that could shake things up. TSM does have a diverse customer base, but that kind of development just shows how important it is to stay ahead in this industry because things change so fast.
Of TSM, it's high risk, high reward.
Yeah, that's a fair way to put it.
Given all that, what do you think? Buy, sell, or hold? What should investors do with TSM right now?
As of today, March 7th, 2025, I'd say hold.
Hold. Why? What's your thinking on that?
I think right now we just need to see what happens. The stock is weak, but it's also shown it can bounce back a little. It's really tough to say for sure which way it's going to go next. We need more data, more information. There's just not enough clarity yet to make any big moves.
So we wait and see.
Exactly. But there are a few things to watch for. Like if it breaks above that 50-day simple moving average, that's around $190 to $195 right now. That could be a good time to buy. But on the other hand, if it falls below 176.77, that might be the time to sell.
So those are kind of like our turning points, the prices to watch for.
Yeah, think of them as indicators. They could tell us which way the momentum is shifting.
But in the end, it all comes down to each individual investor, right? Their risk tolerance, their goals. There's no one right answer for everyone.
Definitely. Everyone needs to figure out what works for them and make their own decisions. Okay, so before we jump into the technical analysis, let's just do a quick recap, make sure everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah.
What are the main plays we've covered?
Well, I think it's safe to say that TSM's at a really interesting point. They're the global leader when it comes to making chips, and they're in a great spot to benefit from, the whole AI revolution. But they also have some big challenges like trade tensions, geopolitical risks, the whole U.S. expansion thing, and, of course, just the fact that the market is so volatile right now.
That's a lot to think about.
It is. But the bottom line is TSM could be a very rewarding investment, but only for those who can handle a certain level of risk.
Not for the faint of heart.
Exactly. You got to be ready for those ups and downs.
Okay, one last question before we wrap this part up. Do you think this massive U.S. investment, do you think it'll work out?
That is the big question, isn't it? I mean, it's a huge gamble, and it could have a major impact on the whole industry, like globally.
So if it works, what could that mean for TSM and the industry as a whole?
Well, if it's a success, it could solidify their position as the top dog and help America secure its place in the tech world. But if it fails...
What if it fails? What happens then?
It could cost TSM a lot, and it could even destabilize the whole industry. There's a lot riding on this. I think it's going to be really fascinating to see how it all plays out.
Definitely going to be an interesting ride.
Oh, yeah. Okay, so with that, I think we should move on to the technical analysis. That'll give us some insight into the short-term trends and maybe some trading opportunities.
Sounds good. Technical analysis that can be really helpful, especially for people who are trying to, make smart trading decisions. But for our listeners who maybe aren't so familiar with technical analysis, could you just give us a quick explanation? What is it and why is it useful?
Sure. So basically, technical analysis involves looking at charts, patterns, and indicators, and we use those to try and predict where the price is going to go next. We're looking for trends, momentum, that kind of thing. So instead of just focusing on how the company's doing, we're analyzing the stock's price history to figure out what the market is telling us.
So we look at the past to see the future. What's the market telling us about TSM right now?
Okay, let's start with the 50-day simple moving average, or SMA, which is something we mentioned before.
Right, that's the average closing price over the past 50 days. That helps us see the short-term trend.
Exactly. And right now, TSM is actually trading below its 50-day SMA. That's generally seen as a bearish signal. It means the stock's been losing momentum lately.
Not a great sign. What about the 200-day SMA? That gives us a longer-term perspective.
Right. So the 200-day SMA, that's a good indicator for the longer term. And what's interesting is that TSM's still trading above its 200-day SMA.
So we got mixed signals, short-term, not looking so good, but long-term, still positive.
Yeah, it's like a tug of war.
And that's why you're saying hold for now.
Yeah.
We need to see who wins that tug of war.
Exactly. Are there any other indicators we should keep an eye on? Well, aside from the moving averages, there's also the Relative Strength Index, or RSI, that measures how strong the price movements are, and it can help us see if a stock is overbought or oversold.
Where's TSM's RSI at right now?
It's probably somewhere between 35 and 45.
And what does that tell us?
Basically, it means it's not overbought or oversold. It's kind of in the middle, a neutral zone. It doesn't really give us a clear signal to buy or sell right now.
So the RSI is not much help at the moment.
Yeah.
Anything else we should be looking at?
Yeah, it's always good to be aware of the support and resistance levels. These are prices where, historically, the stock has had a hard time breaking through, either going up or down.
Okay, so what are those levels for TSM? Where's the support and resistance?
We're seeing some support around 176.77, and then there's stronger support closer to the 200-day SMA, around 165 to 170.
So those are the numbers to watch if the stock starts dropping. Could be a good buying opportunity if you think TSM's a good long-term bet. What about resistance? Where's the resistance?
Well, on the upside, there's resistance around 202.40, and then stronger resistance near that 50-day SMA.
So if it can break above those levels, that could mean it's getting its strength back, like the bulls are taking over again.
Exactly. That could bring in more buyers and maybe even start a rally.
Okay, so considering all these technical details, what's the main takeaway for investors? What should they remember?
I think the biggest thing is that TSM, it's a volatile stock. There are definitely short-term risks, but there's also that long-term potential. And the technical indicators, right now, they're not really giving us a clear picture. So the smartest thing to do is just wait and see what happens, wait for a clearer trend to emerge.
So hold for now and watch those key levels we talked about.
Exactly. Patience is key in this situation. We just need to observe. So now, thinking about what all this means for you, for investors, if you're looking at TSM for your portfolio, I think you really have to balance like the potential, the long-term potential for growth, but also the very real short-term risks that are there. So let's break those two sides down. Let's start with the positives, the bull case. What makes TSM such a, attractive investment?
Well, from everything we've talked about, it sounds like they have a lot going for them. I mean, just
Right.
their position in the market alone is, hard to ignore.
You're right. They've got that huge 60% share of the foundry market. They're the leader when it comes to making these chips, and that's not going to change overnight.
And the whole AI thing, I mean, like we said, it's a huge opportunity. They're right there in the middle of it.
Exactly. The AI boom it's a big deal, and TSM is in a perfect spot to benefit from it. I mean, their advanced chips are essential for like all these AI systems that are being developed and used everywhere in every industry.
And then there's the U.S. expansion. I mean, we talked about the risks, but could that move actually help them in the long run?
If they can execute it well, yeah, it could be a good strategic move. It would help them with things like, the tariff risks, getting incentives from the government, maybe even expanding their customer base.
So there's a lot to like about TSM. But like you said, we can't ignore those risks. What are the potential downsides investors should be thinking about?
Okay, well, there's just the volatility we're seeing right now. The stock's been down, and who knows how quickly it'll recover. The market's just, It's a little shaky right now, and TSM's caught up in that.
And you mentioned the tariffs. That's still a big question mark, right? What could happen with those, and how would that affect TSM?
The trade tensions, especially between the US and China, that's something to watch. If those escalate, it could definitely hurt TSM. Global trade is so complicated, and any change can just like throw everything off.
And of course, their expansion into the U.S. is not a small thing. What are some things that could go wrong there?
Oh, so many things. It's such a huge undertaking. I mean, you always worry about cost overruns, delays, unexpected problems with regulations. There are just so many unknowns, and those could all affect the project, how successful it is and how TSM does financially. And then, there's the whole geopolitical situation too.
Right, that's a constant worry, the relationship between the U.S. and China and with Taiwan right there in the middle.
Exactly. And then on top of all that, there's always the possibility that something could disrupt the whole industry. Like we talked about that Chinese AI chip model it's competitive on price. That kind of development, it could change things. TSM has a good mix of customers, but you always have to be worried about staying ahead in this industry because things change so fast.
So it sounds like with TSM, you could win big, but you could also lose big.
I think that's a pretty accurate way to look at it.
So all things considered, what's your take? What should investors be doing with TSM right now?
Well, as of today, March 7th, 2025, I would say hold.
Hold. What's the reasoning behind that?
It just seems like we're in a wait and see period. The stock, I mean, is weak right now, but we've seen it bounce back a bit too. It's hard to say for sure which way it's going to go next. I think we need more information, more data to go on before making any big decisions.
So no rash moves, just sit tight for now.
Pretty much. But there are some things to watch for. If we see a break above that 50-day simple moving average, which is around $190 to $195 right now, that might be a good time to buy. On the other hand, if it goes below 176.77, that might be a signal to sell.
So those are like those key numbers to watch, those potential turning points.
Exactly. Think of them as indicators. They could show us which way things are heading, which way the momentum's going.
And of course, every investor is different, right?
Yeah.
They have their own risk tolerance, their own goals. What's right for one person might not be right for another.
Absolutely. You have to figure out what works for you, what you're comfortable with, and make your own decisions based on that. Okay, so before we move on to the technical stuff, let's just do a super quick recap, make sure everyone's on the same page.
Yeah, good idea. What are the main things we've covered so far?
Well, I think the big takeaway is that TSM, they're in a really interesting position. They're the top dog, the global leader when it comes to making these chips, and they're ready to take advantage of the AI revolution. But they've also got some serious challenges to deal with, like trade tensions, geopolitics, this big U.S. expansion, and of course the market's just generally volatile right now.
A lot to juggle.
Yeah, but I think the bottom line is that TSM could be a really profitable investment, but only for those who are comfortable with some level of risk.
Not for the risk averse.
Not at all. You got to be ready for the ride.
Okay, I got to ask, do you think this U.S. investment, this massive investment, do you think it's going to work out?
That's the million-dollar question, right? It's a huge gamble, and it could really change the whole industry globally.
So what would it mean if it does work?
Yeah.
For TSM and for, like, the whole industry?
If it's successful, I think it would really cement their position at the top, and it would help the U.S. secure its place in the tech world. But if it fails,
What if it goes wrong?
it could cost them a lot, and it could even destabilize the whole industry. The stakes are pretty high. It's going to be interesting to watch how this all plays out.
It's definitely going to be a wild ride.
For sure. Okay, I think we should move on to the technical analysis now. We can look at some of the short-term trends and maybe find some trading opportunities.
Sounds good. Technical analysis, that can be really helpful, especially for people who are, trying to make those smart trading decisions. But for those listening who maybe aren't so familiar with technical analysis, could you just give a quick explanation of what it is and why it's useful?
Sure. Basically, technical analysis, it's all about looking at charts, patterns, and indicators to try and figure out where the price is going to go next. So we're looking for trends, for momentum, and instead of just focusing on the fundamentals of the company, we're looking at the stock's price history, like what's happened with the price in the past to figure out what the market's telling us.
So we're looking at the past to try and get a glimpse of the future. What's the market saying about TSM right now?
Well, let's start with the 50-day simple moving average, or SMA. We've talked about that before.
Right, that's the average closing price over the last 50 days. And that helps us see what the short-term trend is.
Exactly. And right now, TSM is actually trading below its 50-day SMA, which is generally considered a bearish signal. It suggests the stock has been losing some momentum lately.
Not a great sign. How about the 200-day SMA? That gives us that longer-term picture.
The 200-day SMA, that's a good indicator of the longer-term trend. And the interesting thing is that TSM is still trading above its 200-day SMA.
So we've got these mixed signals then. Short term, it's not looking so good, but long term, it's still positive.
Yeah, it's like there's this push and pull going on.
A tug of war, like you said before. I guess that's why you're recommending holding. For now, we need to see who wins that tug of war.
Exactly. Is there anything else we should be looking at? Any other indicators? Well, besides the moving averages, there's the Relative Strength Index, or RSI. That measures how strong those price movements are, and it can help us see if a stock is overbought or oversold.
Where's TSM sitting with the RSI right now?
It's probably somewhere between 35 and 45.
What does that tell us?
Basically, it means that it's not really overbought or oversold right now. It's kind of in the middle, a neutral zone, so it's not giving us a clear buy or sell signal right now.
So the RSI isn't really giving us much direction at this point. Anything else we should be thinking about?
Well, it's always a good idea to be mindful of those support and resistance levels, those prices where the stock has historically had trouble breaking through, whether it's going up or down.
Okay, so what are those levels for TSM? Where's the support and resistance?
We see some support around 176.77, and then there's some stronger support near that 200-day SMA, which is around like 165 to 170.
Okay, so those are the prices to watch if it starts to drop. Those could be buying opportunities for people who, believe in TSM for the long term.
Right.
What about resistance? Where's the resistance?
On the upside, we've got resistance at about 202.40, and then stronger resistance near that 50-day SMA.
So if it can get above those levels, that could mean it's regaining strength. Like maybe the bulls are back in control.
Right. Breaking above those levels, that could definitely attract more buyers and maybe even lead to a rally.
All right, so looking at all this technical stuff, what's the main takeaway for investors? What's the big picture here?
I think the key takeaway is that TSM is a pretty volatile stock. There are definitely short-term risks, but there's also that long-term potential. And right now, all those technical indicators, they're kind of giving us mixed signals. It's a bit of a confusing picture. So the best thing to do is just wait and see what happens, wait for a clearer trend to emerge.
So we hold tight and watch those key levels we talked about.
Exactly. Patience is key right now. We just need to observe and see how things unfold.
So it sounds like with TSM, it really is a make or break moment for them. I mean, their future depends on getting past these challenges and taking advantage of the opportunities they have.
Yeah, I think that's right. They have a really strong track record, but these next few months, they're going to be crucial for figuring out where they go from here.
Okay, so before we wrap things up, I want to get your final thoughts. What are like the most important things investors should be thinking about when they're looking at TSM?
I'd say the key things to watch are how the trade situation between the U.S. and China develops, how TSM's doing with that U.S. expansion, and whether they can stay ahead of the competition, keep that technological edge.
Those are all good points. Any final words of wisdom for our listeners before we go?
Well, I think when you're investing in this industry, in semiconductors, especially with a company like TSM, you got to be in it for the long haul. And you have to be comfortable with some ups and downs. Like with any investment, the important thing is to do your research, know how much risk you can handle, and have a plan.
That's great advice. Well, thank you so much for being here today. This was a really interesting conversation, and I'm sure our listeners learned a lot about TSM and the whole semiconductor world.
It was my pleasure. I always enjoy these discussions.
And to everyone listening, we hope you found this episode of Investing Talk Podcast helpful and informative. If you liked what you heard, please subscribe to our channel, leave us a comment, and share this episode with your friends. We really appreciate your feedback. It helps us make the show even better.
And as always, don't forget to talk to a financial advisor before making any investment decisions.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time for another look at the world of investing.